Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with an update on the Vietnam War Vessels mod, including the USS Bon Homme Richard. But this one's not so much about the Bonnie Dick as a number of other assets that the same team has been working on to enhance your, let's call it your mid-century East Asian conflict experience. Now, the mods are mainly aimed, obviously, at the Vietnam War, but I think actually some of them come in handy for Korea as well, so let's just go through them. The main one is, of course, the Bonnie Dick, the USS Bon Homme Richard, the CVA-31, which was the second U.S. vessel of that name. The first had been named for John Paul Jones's frigate during the Revolutionary War, which was actually named after Benjamin Franklin. The ship was a gift from the French government, to whom Franklin was acting as the U.S. agent. Franklin's pen name was Poor Richard, which roughly translated into French as Bon Homme Richard. Bon Homme Richard was an Essex-class carrier, one of, and I'm serious, 24 ships in her class. She was built late in the Second World War and was a Pacific warrior for her whole career, serving in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. After joining the action in the summer of 1945 in World War II, she was briefly decommissioned after the war, but was brought back into service during the Korean War, in which she was one of the mainstays of Task Force 77, flying Corsairs, Skyraiders, and F-9F Panthers. After the war, she was fully modernized with the addition of steam catapults and an angled flight deck, among other improvements, and she returned to service in 1955. She was still in service in 1965 when the U.S. Navy was called upon to add its weight to Operation Rolling Thunder in the skies over North Vietnam. In 5 years, she took her place at Yankee Station no fewer than 4 times, spending almost 2 full years in the combat zone, flying principally A-4s and F-8s. When the major air effort in North Vietnam ended in 1971, she and the rest of the remaining Essex-class carriers were basically retired as the U.S. Navy entered a new era, that of the supercarrier. Of course, in DCS, you can ignore the number, if you ignore the number, CVA-31, which does stand out, but if you ignore it, the CVA-31 can stand in for any of the fully upgraded Essex-class carriers, of which I think there were 4 that participated in the air war over Vietnam, the others being the Hancock, the Ticonderoga, and the Oriskany. The Essex-class carriers were involved from the beginning of the conflict, including the opening round of airstrikes into North Vietnam following the Gulf of Tonkin incident. But here, for instance, is where the rest of the Vietnam War Vessels mod starts to come in very handy. If you're a DCS mission designer or you know one that can be bribed. Because the mod also includes 2 classes of ships involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the destroyer USS Maddox and the North Vietnamese P-4 patrol torpedo boats. Now, the USS Maddox DD-731 was a Sumner-class destroyer. Built during the Second World War, she served in the Pacific during the war and was hit by a kamikaze off Formosa in January of 1945, but she was back in service in time to support the invasion of Okinawa by April. After the war, she continued to operate in the Pacific and participated in the Korean conflict and remained in the Pacific in constant service until 1964 saw her assigned to listening patrols off the coast of North Vietnam and the Gulf of Tonkin. P-4 torpedo boats were of World War II design, having been developed by the Soviets for service in the Baltic Sea. After the war, the design was exported to Soviet client states, including Vietnam, who operated 12 of them in 1964. So these two ships, in addition to allowing us to recreate the Gulf of Tonkin incident, in which there was a skirmish between the Maddox and the patrol boats on the 4th of August, followed by another incident where both the Maddox and the USS Turner Joy claimed that they had been attacked again by North Vietnamese patrol boats, a claim which has been disputed since and which may in fact not have actually occurred, but nonetheless caused the United States Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that essentially opened the doors to the air war in North Vietnam. So we now can recreate the Gulf of Tonkin incident, or some variation thereof, and we can also use these ships to provide some local color for other missions, including U.S. carrier group, or attacks on North Vietnamese harbors, or other fictional engagement. So that covers the vessels in the Vietnam War Vessels mod, but I think in some ways the real news with this mod is progress on new aircraft. Now, these are mainly meant to be flown by the AI, but I think they're still really welcome additions to the DCS stable, because they'll allow you to round out the main deck load for carriers at the start of Vietnam. Of course, the obvious missing piece for that deck load for the Essex-class carriers is the F-8 Crusader, which equipped the fighter squadrons on those Essex carriers all the way through the Vietnam War because the F-4 was too heavy to fly from the Essex carriers. The F-8 Crusader, often called the last of the gunfighters, was built by Vought. It entered service in 1957, and it was the first fighter designed to really solve the problem of how to fly an effective supersonic air superiority fighter from a carrier deck. The innovation which made this possible was the Crusader's variable incidence wing, which allowed it to take off and land on a carrier deck while also being able to achieve in-flight speeds in excess of Mach 1.5. Now, if you want to simulate flying off the Bonnie Dick or any of her sister ships, you really need to at least share the deck with some F-8s. Now, it'd be great to fly the aircraft as well, and which you can do with the mod, but the developers will hasten to tell you that it's not really a very high-fidelity experience, and that's not really where they've put their focus. Still, even as an AI aircraft, it is essential if you want to fly the A-4 from an Essex-class carrier. And I will point out that the A-4 operated from the Essexes until it was gradually replaced by the A-7, but the A-6 never flew from them for the same reason as the Phantom. The A-6s were just too heavy to be handled safely on Essex-class carriers, but A-4s were operating off the coast of Vietnam right until the end of the Vietnam Air War. So, between the A-4 and the F-8, you really have all you need to take a trip to Yankee Station aboard the Bonnie Dick or one of her sisters. But this brings us to probably, at least for me, the most exciting new addition in the new version of the Vietnam War Vessels mod, and that is the A-1 Skyraider, or A-5D Skyraider, if you prefer the Navy's original terminology. And yes, you heard that right, the SPAD has come to DCS. Although, again, you can only fly alongside it, not in it, yet. Now, in case you're young enough not to have noticed, the A-1 Skyraider is a piston-engined attack aircraft initially designed for the United States Navy in the late 1940s. It arrived just too late to see action in World War II, but it was a vital part of carrier air groups and Marine air wings during the Korean War. The Skyraiders were renowned for their long loiter time, their heavy payload capacity, and their resilience to ground fire, which pretty much made them indispensable for missions like close air support and search and rescue air escort, even at the time of the Vietnam War. Now, its slow speed meant that it was kind of hard to integrate into large strike packages involving A-4s and F-8s, but it also is what made it ideal for search and rescue missions and for close air support of troops in contact. So, the A-1 was actually a common part of carrier air wings during Vietnam. It's a little bit hard from the sources I could find to figure out just how many A-1s might have been typically embarked and what missions they flew. Clearly there was at least a detachment included in the deck loads, but I'm not sure if it was a full squadron in pretty much every deployment, and at least on the older carriers. And that detachment was there specifically for aircrew search and rescue operations. The squadron histories of all of the A-1 attack squadrons almost universally mention aircrew who were decorated for their bravery in carrying out search and rescue missions. Now, the other thing to remember about the A-1 in Vietnam is that even though the Navy started reducing the number of A-1s embarked on its carriers, those surplus aircraft found a willing home in the United States Air Force, which took them from the Navy and turned them into one of their main platforms for delivering close air support and providing aircrew search and rescue in the south and in the near regions of the north. So it would be entirely usual for any mission that involved close air support in South Vietnam or search and rescue operations to include A-1s as well as F-100s and maybe even OV-10 Broncos, or at least one of the OV-10 Broncos. Now, none of these are available as official modules from DCS, it's true, but they are all available at various levels of fidelity to add to your Vietnam scenarios. And of course, if you want to fly high-fidelity aircraft, you can add in a Marine Corps A4 or F4, if you don't mind having the F4E model stand in for the Marine Corps F4B. And of course, you can always fly the UH-1 Huey. So why we all wish for more jets. From this pivotal moment in the history of air combat, it's getting more and more possible to create a real Vietnam environment that is closer to feeling authentic, thanks to the work that the developers like VSN and VWV are volunteering to the cause. Now, I should also note, by the way, that the addition of the A-1 means we don't have to stop at Vietnam with the Bonnie Dick. The A-1 combined with the F-9F, which is also available as a download, gives us a credible Korean War deck load. Now, bear in mind that the Bon Homme Richard did not have an angled flight deck in 1951 through 53. It was only added in 1955, so it won't be completely authentic, but the mix of aircraft would be typical of even a simulated Marine Corps airfield ashore in the late part of the Korean War when the Corsair had been phased out, but the Skyraider and the F-9F were retained. Now, of course, if we had the Corsair, our Korean life would be complete. Well, again, if you want to stick to flying official modules, you can fly the F-86, for instance, as top cover, while you have some A-1s and F-9Fs going after targets on the ground. So overall, it may not be that widely known, but I really think this mod is great if you want some period authentic context for your missions in Vietnam or Korea. Now, everyone, of course, is going to comment or complain about the modules that ED and its official developers have not yet released, which is natural and easy to do. And while VWV may not fully scratch all of your Southeast Asian itches, I think it's a welcome addition that improves the DCS experience there if what you want is something that looks and feels authentic. So, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion of the Vietnam War Vessels mod. I certainly would encourage you to download it. The link is in the description. And my hat is off once again to TETET and all of the people that have worked on this mod. Thank you for your continued efforts on our behalf. That's going to be it for now. Thanks for listening. This is going to be Sidekick, signing off.